Good morning. My name is Joel Held, and this is contemporary worship in the traditional church context. About me, I am 48 years old. I'm originally from the Netherlands, and this here is a picture of when I think it was about 4 or 5. And we didn't always dress like this, but there were special occasions and days that we spent time dressing like the old days, and that was always a fun experience for us to have. Um, the picture here on my left is the last photo we took when we were in the Netherlands before we moved to the United States. And then the picture on the right is my brother and I playing together at an event. We are both very capable and excited musicians, so to speak. I am married with 2 kids. My wife's name is Sarah, and my son's name are Andrew and Philip. And this was actually at last year's best practices. If you know me now, you know that I have a big beard now. But we all got to go together last year, so that was a really special thing that we got to do. Um, about me a little more, I've been involved professionally with music since 1990. My favorite color is red. My favorite instrument is the bass guitar. The first time I ever sang in front of people was Silent Night at age 7, and I sang that in Dutch. My non favorite musical activity is reading, and actually, I should clarify that it's audible because I drive for work, and so it's really neat to be able to listen as I'm driving to and from work. When I get upset, you can hear a little bit of my accent, and I've been accused of taking too many selfies. All right, this is the last time that I play at the pipe organ. That was at St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Pomona. It was a friend of mine, his installation. I do sometimes get asked to play, but since I don't do it every week anymore, I ask folks to give me a couple of weeks to kind of get warmed up on this instrument. But it's definitely a fun thing that I get to do from time to time. All right, so as we get started with this, um, when we think about adding traditional, contemporary worship into a traditional setting, this this view here is kind of what jumps to mind, right? It's something that doesn't fit, right? But it's quite funny to look at. But let's say you are interested in incorporating modern worship music without causing a church wide uproar, right? If you've been part of any type of traditional congregation, any change, right? It might be the carpet color, maybe getting new pews, a wall needs to be painted, a new stained glass window needs to go in. It will cause a ruckus. Imagine music. So, how can we present meaningful and relevant modern music in a context that was designed best to accommodate liturgical music and an organ? Like, what do we do? How do we do it? That is the question that we are attempting to answer here. Um, and as we get ready to answer that question, we need to answer the question why. Why are you doing what you're doing? Why do you want to introduce modern music into your traditional setting? Is it because you like it? Is it because all the hymns are putting you to sleep? What's your reason? It is very important whenever we embark on something this important that we know our why, right? Is it in reach? Meaning, is this something that your congregation loves? And this is a way for you to reach the people in your church, get them even more engaged in worship of our Lord. Is it an outreach? Do you feel that you can bring people to the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ by having new, different music as an outreach? Then a good question to ask, who exactly is proposing it? Are you the person who's proposing it? And someone else proposing it? And then secondly, what is their agenda? Why are they promoting this service? Are they trying to relive a garage band dream in their own church? I don't know. It's a good question to ask. And then also, are you trying to replicate your local non denominational church? I hope you're not, because we cannot be a non denominational church because we are not a non denominational church. Music in our context serves a different function than it does in those kinds of congregations. We know that music leads us from point A to point B to point C to the end of the service. The music is a vehicle in which the whole worship experience happens. In Northern Ops, typically music is the first 20, maybe 30 minutes. After that, it goes into about 40 to 50 minutes worth of their instructional teaching time. Completely different concepts, and it's not wise for you to put that context into a traditional church setting because it just won't fit. Okay? So as you continue to ask these questions, what logistical issues should you be concerned about? What are the kinds of things that could make this potentially successful, or maybe could make this potentially a failure? And once you've kind of figured out the logistics of your room, you have all those, you have all your ducks in a row, you've talked to the right people, then you should ask questions like, what will your instrumentation and vocal arrangements look like? Remember, you are going to be doing this worship in a place that is not meant for modern music. So how are you going to adjust what you have to make it work? Alongside with that, can your current sound system accommodate modern contemporary music? Many of these churches are echo chambers because it was meant to be done with an organ and an a cappella voices. And then also, can your church avoid it? Right? We don't want to enter into anything and not know the cost. Luke 14:28-30 says it this way: For which of you intending to build a tower does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it? Else, after he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, This man began to build and was not able to finish. And that's a really important point. You are passionate about this service. You're passionate about bringing this kind of music to your congregation because you'll feel it will help with their spiritual growth. Make sure you have done your due diligence. Okay? Because by its very nature, modern worship requires a lot of moving parts to do it well. Okay? Modern worship is you will need all hands on deck. Everybody plays a part. What would in the past be maybe just an organist and a pastor now takes 10 to 12 people to pull off successfully, right? In our traditional church service setting, your organist, choir director, they manage all aspects of worship. The only thing that you really have to deal with is your choir, which in most churches will be once or twice a month. But for the most time, it's just two people running a service and doing it fairly successfully. But when we get to the modern worship service, there are many more needs. You need a worship leader. You need a band, right? If you want to do it the way it's done, you need at least a guitarist, a keyboardist, a bass guitarist, and drums. And that's at minimum. To get the mixes and things that you hear on the radio, you want melody, whether that's a female or a lead melody, and then have alto and tenor parts. Then you have to have a capable audio engineer, right? Because you can be amazing, but if your tech isn't good, we won't hear how great you are. Then of course the visual tech, because you're going to use ProPresenter. Maybe if you're old school, you might try to get away with PowerPoint, but you'll be using something to project words because you don't use paper bulletins. So again, a worship service that can be managed by your organist, choir director, now requires a team. And not only does it require a team, you as its leader, not only are you the music director or worship leader, you are a manager, right? Not much different than a manager at a McDonald's or at an In-N-Out. You are a manager. Not only do you have to manage all those pieces, you manage personalities. That can sometimes be easy, sometimes be difficult. But that is a skill that we definitely do want to develop. Okay? So as I look at this, I developed something called the 4 S's. These are 4 keys that help us as we think about how do we incorporate modern worship in a traditional setting. And they're like 4 main steps, right? It's a spiritual aspect. The skill. We talked about sound and then steps. And what I mean by steps is little tiny steps. And I will elaborate further. But first, the spiritual. We're reminded, right? Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I've commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Spiritual is the first and foremost when starting a modern worship service. At its most basic premise, it is a spiritual, a tool to reach the lost for Christ. It's a tool to reach the lost for Christ. And that should be our first and foremost focus. It's not so that you can show off your great skills as a musician or as a singer or as a musical director, right? That is not what we're here to do. When we do this, this is a tool that we want to use that people can receive from Christ. If they're believers, that they just receive the amazing gifts that they have because they know Him, and for those who don't know Him, that they might come to a place that they would that they're made conscious of the fact that He is their Lord and Savior, and that He wants a relationship with them. First, so once we have that set, the next thing we want to be very specific about is skill. Right? Psalm 33:3 says what? Sing a new song of praise to Him. Play skillfully on the harp and sing with joy. I think in Second Chronicles we are reminded that the master, or I should say the student, is as skilled as the master. God is a God who does things well. Nothing is haphazard. Nothing is junk. It is all done well. And that is, as we are presenting music to people, it needs to be done well, especially if this music is meant to be an outreach. If this music is meant to be an outreach and it has been advertised correctly, you're going to draw people who typically don't go to church. What do people typically do on weekends? They might go to clubs, they might go dancing, they might do this, they might do that. And in all those experiences, the music that they hear is done skillfully and it's done well. And so especially if you're doing outreach, these people come in with that expectation, right, of hearing something done skillfully. We know that if this is just members within a church, this is an in-reach, skill isn't necessarily the focus. Excellence is not necessarily what is striven for, right? And you have many, many forgiving people in church. And if you remotely hit the right note, you remotely do it well, they will just pat you on the back and say, well done, right? But we know, again, God calls us to be skillful, to live toward excellence, right? You keep singing that note. I don't think it sounds how you think it sounds, right? We all have seen these kind of situations, or this one, I don't always sound this good, but when I do, it's because I practice, right? So again, when you have an organist, you have a person who most likely is degreed. It's what they study. They're playing. They excel at it. You hear them, and it's beautiful. And so think about it. In an organist, choir director, with somebody who's degreed, who plays flawless, right? And then you attempt to include something in your service, which is not, right? Joe used to play guitar in his garage. Maybe your friend played drums when they were little, and they trying to put something together that quality-wise is not quite where it needs to be. The skill is not there, so it's very important. And as you think about this and think through this, that you make sure that it's done skillfully. Then sound, right? Your sound system and everything associated with it. And if you've served in a traditional context at all, you've heard these, right? My face when they say my music is too loud when it's at 20%. And I have had to tell a guitar player a time or two, like, hey, you're too loud. And that is the exact look and face that I get, right? But I've seen the one on my right also. I said the music is too loud. I have had members buy me dB meters, and I said I have one. They're like, no, 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 this is an actual one in your hand, because they felt that the sound wasn't what they wanted to be. A couple of things about sound that you have to understand, especially when you deal with modern worship, when you include drums, bass, and the guitar. The nature of those instruments, and for them to sound the way they're supposed to sound, you cannot play them soft. You don't have to play them loud, but you cannot just get away by playing this instrumentation soft. The key here is however your volume is, and you need to make sure that each instrument in your mix can individually be heard. Okay? It needs to be individually heard. What do I mean with it being individually heard? It means that if you close your eyes and you turn around away from the stage, that you could distinctly make up what's a guitar, what's a drum, what's a bass, what's a keyboard, and what's vocals. Okay? And that we know within our traditional context, lyrical content, the words are more important than the music. So in a traditional context, your vocal is going to stand out more. If maybe in more of a non-denom context, the vocal is maybe 40% in the mix. In a traditional setting, it's more like 60%. Okay? It doesn't matter how good your team is. If you can't hear them, if the vision for worship cannot be articulated because sound is an issue, you have a problem. As a church, you have to be willing to invest in a good sound system, to allow the gifts and talents of your team to be properly articulated. Just a fact. And then the last of the four S's, and I call this one steps. And in parentheses, I put small. And as you can see, the little meme there says Rome was not built in a day. And here it goes. When we are passionate about a mission, a goal that God has laid on our hearts, we sometimes feel that means by any means necessary. You feel you've gotten that mandate from God, so you are going to go do it. You are just going to go do it. You're like a bull in a china shop. You will do what it takes, right? And leave a lot of debris and disaster in your wake. The reality is, completely leaving God out of something that He initiated, right? That's because that's what we do when we act like a bull in a china shop when we feel by any means necessary, right? That's what we do. He initiated it, but then we get frustrated when it fails. We're like, Lord, you initiated it. Why isn't it working? Well, it's because you've gone about it a non-Christian way, really, like when you think about it. The reality is your congregation might not be ready for a full rock band. You might be playing an acoustic guitar and a cajon for a while. It might not be fun at first, but small, consistent steps. Less is more. 1,000 small steps can accomplish more than 100 big steps. Don't try to rush your progress. Remember, a step forward, no matter how small, is a step in the right direction. Now, you've gotten to this point, you've heard everything that I've told you, and you went back to your pastor, your board, you got approval, and you're like, now what? What do I do? Where do I go from here? Well, there are three models that you can go with. I call the pro, the semi-pro, and the volunteer model. And each of these models has their pros and cons, right? If we go with the pro model, it's a paid musician worship leader model. Quality-wise and return on your investment, quote unquote, this is the best, but also the most expensive model. You are going to get great playing, great musicianship, great singing. But this is not cheap. This will cost you an arm and a leg, right? I notice many church plants will go with this kind of model, but the reality when going with this model is you don't get buy-in from the musicians, especially if you're a smaller congregation and maybe it's not growing as much as you thought it would. When you just have hired guns, it just doesn't translate as well as people who are bought into your vision. I remember, sharing with some musicians, that came and played, is that I rather have a less talented musician who's committed to the ministry than just somebody who's there because they have great skill. And granted, there's time and a place for great skill. I'm not saying there isn't. The second one would be the semi-pro model, which is basically your worship leader, your music director, right? Your director of parish music, right? That's their role. They're paid, and they develop the gifts in your congregation, right? And if there's anyone that I recommend, it's this one. But it just means you have to do really your due diligence with your worship leader, music director person, right? They have to be a leader. They have to be a manager. But more importantly than that, this position in the semi-pro model, they have to be a teacher. They have to have the patience of a teacher. They have to be willing to work with people that are really skilled and people that are not so skilled. My recommendation is there a music person at your elementary school that does the music class and does that, but maybe also leads worship? You want a person that is also a teacher. And this kind of position, they will really be able to grow that ministry. They will be able to grow your team, and your players will be better off for it. Um, it's in this type of model that you would train young people. For instance, I think 2 weeks ago, I had, I think my whole band was made up of either current students or former students. And I mean, I started them off at 10, 11 years old, right? Participating in the band. Maybe it was playing key bass, maybe it was doing something else, but they started young. And as a teacher, I developed those skills, right? And some still take private lessons with me, and we go over things, and I teach them things. There's nothing, at least from a teaching standpoint, that you're actually giving them lessons, but you give a lesson and then you're able to put it into practice like that week, right? And they can see where they are as a musician. Oh, this is what my teacher meant. This is what he said. And what it does, you get a player who's not as nervous because they know you as a teacher and they know that you have that patience for it. But then again, like I said, it just requires you to have a person that's not just a worship leader, music director, but also has the heart of a teacher. And the last model, that's your volunteer model. And I would dare say this is almost the most dangerous model that you can have. Because this is, I mean, it's popular, but it's the least effective for outreach. It's primarily in reach, and it's your own members who will fund this, and it's usually the member or members that maybe as young people had a desire or a dream to be in a band. It just didn't work out. They started jamming with somebody from church and said, you know what, we need a modern worship band. And they started it. One of the things with this is because it's usually volunteer led and funded, that you as the church leader, you lose control and vision. You lose that in a model like this, and you tend to almost grow a church within a church. This worship team tends to be clicky, right? They're part of the clique. They're the band in your church. So it's not one that I recommend, but again, it is the cheapest, and a lot of churches end up going with this model if they cannot afford somebody to be the worship leader, musical director. So, as I alluded to or already a little bit, but I'm going to unpack this a little bit, is may I suggest that as you try to figure out how to introduce modern music into a traditional setting, is start with what you have, right? Do you have an organ, a piano, or an acoustic guitar? Those are great instruments to slowly and quietly introduce something new, right? You can take a modern worship song like King of Kings, right? A Hillsong, or What a Beautiful Name. And you can actually play those on a piano. You could play those on an organ, and they would sound fine, right? And the reality is, some people wouldn't necessarily know what kind of song it was, but that it had a very nice melody. So the goal is start with the instrumentation that you have, and then, as I spoke of just before this, is train your young people. Train your young people. You get them to play music 10, 11, 12 years old, they will stay with you through high school and they don't go away for college. They will stay with your team, and they will be very competent musicians. So, as I said, music is music. You can play modern music with traditional instrumentation. Um, the key is here, if you go that route, that you have a capable singer or cantor, like somebody who vocally could carry everything. Uh, and start with one or two songs that you add to your service. Don't go nuts. Be very selective about how you go about adding um, these songs. And if you feel like you're at a place that you can add a band, I would say don't go with a full-on rock band. Don't go with a live drum. Don't go with an electric drum set. Electric drum set, unless they are set correctly, they sound like your Casio keyboard. So don't do that. But if you do want to do that, get a cajon. Use your piano. Use your guitar. Use some shakers. Uh, have a bass guitar. But I don't encourage you going from like organ and piano to full on rock band. I just don't think that's going to translate and going to help. Okay. They're saying, okay, Joel, I get all this advice, but how? What's the how here? The how here is that the cool thing about hymns is that hymns are very thematic, right? If your pastor's preaching on something, you can figure out, you can find out what he's talking about and how to relate it, these hymns. In modern music, thank you, Jesus. The last 5 years, they've really improved on that. Within Song Select, which is a subscription-based service that you can buy, or Praise Charts, where they have become very thematic and very open to many type of denominations, and they'll have songs, they'll have libraries that fit your themes. Again, as I mentioned before, make sure you only add in a little bit, one or two songs, and then basically research yourself. Contact us. Check out YouTube or other services, Spotify, Apple Music. Um, if you have a service like Song Select, they will actually show you like the top 10 or top 20 songs. There's a reason why certain music is the top 20. It's because their chord structure, their melodic structure makes it very singable and very popular. So if you were going to go that direction, I would definitely look at those kinds of songs that seem to be popular, right? I would ask friends and neighbors in other churches in other states, like, hey, what of the modern songs are you seeing? Which ones resonate, right? I mean, you can even just go on Google and type in top 10 Christian songs and learn those. And what's really interesting about these, at least these popular songs, is they tend to have very simple chord progression. So even though you hear the song and you're like, I can never do this, the structure which they are built is that you can break them down and play it in a very simple form, right? And so I encourage you, if you hear a song, it sounds like, I can't do this. I mean, gosh, please connect with me and I will give you a broken down version of the song that you want to do. But I would definitely go with the ones that are in vogue now, that are popular now, and songs that resonate with people. As far as keys, the way I look at the way the keys work, there's some recordings that you hear, and it seems like these male singers are singing in female keys, and maybe some of these female singers are singing in crazy, almost seems like male keys. my suggestion when dealing with those kinds of things is whenever you lead, you should always have both a male and a female on your melody, right? Because if it's a song that, I don't know, let's say it is like in a really high key, um, these worship leaders, they'll sing it so high that you could sing it an octave lower and it still translates, right? And the same thing with some of those female parts. You could just uh, do an octave lower and it works, or you could even have your male and female leads swap those parts. So yes, you could go and change keys and do all those kinds of things, but if you have multiple people singing melody, you will your congregation will be able to follow along with um, what they need as far as guidance to sing the song. So um, some churches, especially some churches that are um, that don't have an opportunity to rehearse during the week. Uh, Maybe they're a church plant and don't have their own building. Whatever the reason may be, some churches just don't have they don't have that ability. And so what happens is you get YouTubes, and YouTubes come in certain keys. You know, unless you have the time to make your own YouTubes, you want to send them to whatever is the popular version of that song. And again, those are going to be in higher keys. But if you make sure to have both male and female leads, and you're okay with having some people sing an octave down, your congregation will be able to sing along with you. And then just a little comment on song selection as it deals with doctrine. I mean, many denominations, even traditional ones, they have different takes on theology and on doctrine. And it is important as you're choosing songs for your context that you make sure that you connect with your pastor, that you make sure that you connect with some authority within your denominational structure that's able to give you advice as to whether or not this matches your doctrine. And the reality is, even if a song does not necessarily match your doctrinal beliefs, you or your pastor, if you guys feel that it's a song that's good enough, you can frame it in such a way and explain to your congregation why you're singing this song. That if they might think it's about this, then you can say, no, 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 we're singing it as that, right? I mean, a really easy example of framing is a song, Come to the Altar, right? In some contexts, that's a song regarding communion, right? In other contexts, it's a song about coming to receive Christ, right? And depending on where you find yourself, you have to frame it in that way, right? Or a song like Reckless Love. That's another one that people tend to don't always know where to place, right? That's a song that can very easily be framed and said, well, you know, this is what it means. But this is something that you have to wrestle through with your pastor. And which brings me to this point that your pastor is really the head worship leader who delegates authority to you as a musical director, the song leader, or as is known, the worship leader. And it is imperative that you're aligned doctrinally, of course, but that you're okay with your pastor speaking into what you do, right? If the pastor has a sermon dealing with this and he's like, can you play a song with this? You need to be open to that, right? I mean, you need to be open to saying, hey, pastor, what's your theme this week, right? I mean, in a wonderful world, we would actually like sit down together and formulate the service, right? At the college for our Sunday night service, we actually have a team of like 4 or 5, sometimes 6 people that actually plan the service together, right? And it is very thematic. It goes through a process, and it just comes out beautiful because you have all this collaboration, which sometimes we don't have that opportunity to be that intentional. But if you do have that opportunity, I would highly recommend it. I mean, gosh, even this last Sunday, I led worship. I led the musical portion, but for my studies, as I'm in school to become a pastor, it was my week to deliver a message. So knowing where I was coming from with the message, I'm like, I knew exactly where it's coming from. I was able to shape those songs, and they matched perfectly, right? And sometimes that's the case, sometimes that's not the case. But I think as we are giving the congregants, a time to receive from God, that we should make it as clear as to what God is communicating to them on that day. So, what are the best practices for adding contemporary music with traditional instrumentation? Well, a couple of things we want to look at. Um, First of all, like I mentioned before, less is more, right? And the goal of music is to convey truths about God, to give Him praise and honor, and to be encouraged by the songs that we sing. So, less distraction is important. Really loud music, solos, overly complicated music, etc., can make it difficult to hear what God is telling us through this music. It makes it difficult for us to receive, the message of Christ, what He's done for us. It makes it difficult when there's a lot that is clouding that message. I remember being a young musician and playing with folks, and they would always say, "Less is more, less is more." The point is, especially in Christian music, is for the message of Christ to be released, to come out, not um, not our great playing to be showcased. Secondly, I would say prominent melody line. As great as harmonies are, your goal as a music director is to make sure, again, that the words of the music are clearly communicated to your congregation. And so I think it's important to have both a male and female sing melody at the same time, and in that way everyone in your congregation can follow along. They can hear their range and they can join it. We know that certain singers, songs that we like to do in worship, are sung fairly high, but they're sung so high that a male voice could actually sing it an octave lower, and it would be very singable for the congregation, right? And so there are ways to kind of work that, but it's important to make sure that's prominent and that everybody can sing along. Harmony should not dominate. They're just to add color, and this is a good rule of thumb. This is what I use with my teams. Is simply this: a first verse should be melody, first chorus melody, because you are teaching the song, you're teaching the part, especially if this is a new song. You want to make sure that the melody is clearly articulated, and then the second half of the second verse is when you would add typically an alto harmony at that point. And that continues into the second chorus, right? You might have some singers in your congregation that like singing parts, and they'll be able to latch on to that part because it's simple. It's just one. And then with modern music, typically there's what you call a bridge. So with these bridges, you could have your full-on melody and your two harmonies. By this time, the theme of the melody is established. And then as you go into your third chorus, also, you can add your two extra harmonies, and it works great. Because people, by that time, even if they came in not knowing the song, by that third and final chorus, they actually know and understand the songs. I believe that more than three harmonies is called a choir, and that's where that should be. But in a modern worship context, this is a good rule of thumb. There's some variance on it, but altogether, this is something that you can follow. Um, Again, music should be cantor, song leader led, right? If you're in a real traditional context, you will have a cantor. If you're in a more, you're a little more contemporary, you'll have a song leader or a worship leader. But as a worshiper, it is easy to follow one song leader, okay? And that's here to point versus three or four song leaders. I know many churches, they like to have like a wall of singers. It's easier to stay focused when you're only have to pay attention to one or at most two song leaders, right? Like you have a male and a female. Um, those should be the ones that are up front. If you want more singers, if you're able to place them in different parts of the the front of the church, but your focus should just be on the two that are leading people in the song, so they can look at them for guidance on how the songs should be presented and how the song should go. And then finally, which is, I mean, we know this, is don't try to mimic the megachurch. You are who you are. Your church has its own culture and identity. Be satisfied with who you are as a church. Authentically and organically add modern songs as it fits your church context, right? You're never going to be able to do a Chris Tomlin song the way Chris Tomlin does it, or Phil Wickham, or you name it, because it is done for a different audience. It's really done for a different church setting. We have to work with the gifts that we're given. The reality is, in these older buildings that are just not wired for modern acoustics, a cajon, a bass, a piano or some sort of keyboard, acoustic guitars, shakers, percussion, all that stuff fits really well and is really manageable in that kind of environment, right? But sometimes when we get thinking about, oh, we need to either add modern songs or we want to develop our traditional service into a more contemporary service, we really tend to think out of the box. And we have to realize that our sanctuaries, some that are, maybe 100 years old, some are 50, 60, 70 years old, they're not meant for that. And that's okay. There are people that don't like to go to church with 1,000 people. They're really happy with going to church with 100 or 50. So know your strengths, right? Know the people that are in your congregation. Make sure you poll them. You do your research and find out kind of what will minister to your congregation. Because this is the thing, you might be passionate about incorporating modern music into a traditional setting. But if your congregation, that's not where they find themselves, that's not what gives them joy, that's not what allows them to worship God, then you doing that is not going to enhance anything. If anything, it will make it worse. Or you'll create a clique, right? Because what happens if you try to add it into a traditional service, but there's too much tension, so it doesn't work, like what do? A lot of churches, they will add another service for those people that like the contemporary. And what do you have then? Instead of one congregation worshiping together, you get two congregation. You get your regular traditional congregation, and then you have this little clique, a little mini church within a church that does their praise and worship. And in my experience and what I've seen, it's not even done well. So I encourage congregations that if they are thinking along the lines of wanting to add this music, maybe potentially thinking of a service, be mindful. Plan how to do it well in this context, and it will be a great reward and blessing to your congregation.